geopolitical fault lines are fracturing, and the tech world is transforming just as violently beneath them. Artificial intelligence is spreading across every industry. eVTOL air taxis are preparing to swarm city skies, autonomous vehicles are rewriting the rules of transport, and drone warfare is already redrawing the front lines of global conflicts. All of these revolutions share a single invisible backbone: low Earth orbit broadband. LEO satellites won't just connect these technologies, they will enable them, steer them, and ultimately control them. That means whoever owns these constellations doesn't just dominate a market, they own the central nervous system of the 21st century planet. This is no longer a business race, it's a desperate scramble for digital sovereignty, and every major power is waking up to the same nightmare: the realization that their critical infrastructure could soon be held in the orbit of someone else's billionaire, someone else's military, or someone else's nation. The sky is being carved up, and the next map of global influence isn't being drawn on land or sea, it's being sketched in the satellite trajectories. When the Trump administration's policies drove a wrecking ball through the transatlantic alliance, Europe looked up and saw a terrifying future: a sky where their connectivity, their defense networks, and their AI compute could be switched off by a foreign hand. This shock has fused into a single frantic resolve: build a sovereign LEO system or accept permanent relegation to a tenant in a world where they no longer command. Europe has never been a big space power, but managed to gain dominant foothold in the satellite arena. Through the European Space Agency, they have also been a major scientific and technological contributor to space science. They excel in areas like Earth observation with the Copernicus program and deep space science with Rosetta and JUICE programs. However, they are and have always been weak at rocket launch capacities. Europe is a big satellite power with a mature world-class industrial base for geostationary orbit satellites. Major corporations like Airbus Defence and Space and Thales Alenia Space are global leaders in manufacturing high-performance telecommunications, imaging, and scientific satellites. When it comes to service operators, they have Luxembourg-based SES, which operates a large fleet of geostationary Earth orbit satellites, which provide TV broadcast and internet connectivity services worldwide. But geosatellites are no longer suitable, especially in case of broadband satellite service delivery. Geo provider Viasat's broadband subscriber base has plummeted from 603,000 in 2020 to roughly 143,000 in 2025. But geo broadband providers aren't ready to concede the market. Viasat is fighting back with its new Viasat 3 satellites, engineered to take on LEO constellations more directly. These satellites are designed to raise download speeds from around 41 megabits per second to nearly 100 megabits per second, putting them within striking distance of Starlink's 127 megabits per second average. Each Viasat 3 carries over 1,000 steerable beams on Ku band, injecting more than 1 terabit per second of additional capacity into each network cluster. However, geosatellites face one immutable disadvantage: latency. Signals must travel roughly 35,000 kilometers to reach geostationary orbit and back, while LEO signals travel only a fraction of that distance. So even if geosystems can be engineered to match LEO download speeds, the latency gap will leave them far less competitive for real-time applications like online gaming, stock trading, remote vehicle control, or robotic surgery, where every millisecond counts. France is the nation raising the largest concerns about Europe's lack of competitive LEO constellations and seems to be leading the charge for a sovereign European competitor. France-based Eutelsat is currently the only incumbent European company who has successfully pivoted from geosatellite to LEO constellations. They still maintain geosatellites providing video broadcasting and data services across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Eutelsat, along with SES, also provide government and critical infrastructure connectivity, with Eutelsat notably maintaining its satellite TV service for Ukrainian civilians throughout the conflict. Eutelsat acquired OneWeb to create Europe's main private contender in the low-orbit satellite broadband race, currently dominated by American Starlink from SpaceX. Eutelsat OneWeb was created by a merger of France-based Eutelsat and UK-based OneWeb in 2023. Eutelsat was mainly a GEO provider, whilst OneWeb was building a LEO system. OneWeb was established in 2012 as a global satellite communications company focused on delivering high-speed, low-latency broadband internet to underserved regions, enterprises, and governments. But unlike consumer-centric competitors like Starlink, OneWeb prioritized institutional market segments like aviation, marine operations, disaster response, and rural connectivity. Its key clients include telecom operators expanding rural access, aerospace giants like Airbus, and governments investing in digital infrastructure to connect remote areas. However, this constellation is hampered by structural weaknesses, financial instability, operational delays, and unsustainable cost dynamics that threaten to ground its ambitions. Unlike Starlink's low Earth services targeting the mass market, Eutelsat OneWeb uses satellites in polar orbits to serve enterprise and government markets. Their use of synchronized orbital planes 1,200 kilometers above Earth's surface hurts the performance of OneWeb constellation by increasing the latency of the connection, thus limiting the types of services OneWeb can provide. The company faced significant financial hurdles, filing for bankruptcy in 2020 due to funding issues worsened by the COVID pandemic. However, a consortium led by UK's government and Bharti Global, an Indian telecommunications operator, acquired OneWeb later that year, enabling it to complete its first-generation satellite constellation. The UK government stake positioned OneWeb as a sovereign asset, but its merger with Eutelsat in 2023 made the company a Franco-Anglo-European company with global reach. OneWeb's satellite, developed in partnership with Airbus, operates using Ku-band spectrum for user links and Ka-band for gateway connections to ground stations, delivering speeds of up to 500 megabits per second per terminal. A notable limitation is their lack of laser inter-satellite connects, forcing reliance on a global network of 40-plus ground gateways to route data. This architecture necessitates robust international infrastructure, particularly in remote or oceanic regions, and is very expensive to run and maintain. Development is currently focused on second-generation satellites, which will introduce critical upgrades like laser inter-satellite links and enhanced throughput to significantly boost network's performance and resilience. The introduction of inter-satellite laser will eventually bring the OneWeb download speeds performance closer to modern LEO constellations, but it will still be significantly behind on latency due to its satellites placed in 1,200 km orbits, while its competitors are closer to 600 km orbits. Eutelsat is trying to intelligently integrate the OneWeb LEO constellation with its existing geostationary satellites, optimizing coverage and advancing on non-terrestrial networks and direct-to-device availability. OneWeb has established itself in the satellite connectivity market with a distinct high-value approach that contrasts sharply with the mass market model of competitors like Starlink. Operating on a wholesale model through partners like Connecticut Satellite Solutions, its services are priced for enterprise users, typically starting above $1,000 per month, which inherently limits mass consumer adoption. This strategy involves partnering with major telcos like AT&T and BT, but in doing so, OneWeb cedes direct consumer relationships and brand control to these partners, who can also further mark up prices, potentially affecting competitiveness. The company's focus is on premium connectivity applications where reliability and coverage are paramount. Key target markets include in-flight broadband via partners like Intelsat and Satixfy, maritime connectivity, and secure government communications, evidenced by significant contracts with entities like French and UK armed forces. To extend its reach into emerging markets, OneWeb also partners with telecom providers like Bharti Airtel of India to provide 5G network backhaul in remote regions of Africa and India. Eutelsat had been pivoting towards connectivity for a decade as its core video broadcasting business stagnated in the face of streaming services. The acquisition of OneWeb was a decisive move to accelerate this shift and build a combined GEO and LEO powerhouse to compete with Starlink's growing dominance. Today, the merged entity operates a hybrid fleet of 35 geostationary satellites for broadcast and broadband alongside OneWeb's 648 first-generation LEO satellites, positioning it uniquely to offer integrated global coverage. Eutelsat at the moment has the biggest European LEO constellation with more than 648 satellites, making it Europe's largest operator of low Earth orbit satellites and an obvious candidate as the European champion. The constellation will face significant competitive pressure, particularly from Amazon's Project Kuiper and the Chinese Guowang and Qianfang globally. The OneWeb satellites operate in a polar orbit at an altitude of approximately 1,200 kilometers distributed across 12 orbital planes. This high altitude, compared to Starlink's 550-kilometer orbit, provides each satellite with a broader coverage footprint, which is more efficient for serving large remote areas. The network delivers speeds of up to 195 megabits per second downloads with latency of under 70 milliseconds using Ku-band frequencies. Its polar inclination is a key feature, ensuring reliable connectivity over the most remote regions of the Earth, including the Arctic, Antarctic, and major global aviation and maritime routes. Eutelsat's roadmap involves substantial investment to maintain and expand this constellation. The company expects to spend up to $2.5 billion to deploy an additional 440 LEO satellites, which are needed to sustain and enhance the OneWeb constellation. In 2024, Elon Musk called his Starlink system the backbone of the Ukrainian army because of its wide use defending against Russia's invasion, and warned that their entire front line will collapse if he turned it off, sending the Europeans scrambling for alternatives. In 2025, when the French government became the biggest shareholder in the Eutelsat OneWeb satellite company, a choice was made to avoid dependence on other powers. The French Financial Ministry said their $1.5 billion investment will help the satellite company compete with Elon Musk's Starlink. The investment was to fund a renewal of Eutelsat's satellite fleet and improve its financial situation, including through a debt restructuring. The French government also awarded Eutelsat a 10-year, $1 billion deal at the Paris Air Show to provide military communications for the French armed forces. Eutelsat faces the costly challenge of launching its satellites, which directly impacts its competitiveness. The company relies on expensive third-party rockets like the Ariane 6 and the Soyuz 2, with launch costs around $60 million per mission. This stands in stark contrast to competitor SpaceX, which uses its own reusable Falcon 9 rockets for approximately $15 million per launch, a four-fold cost disadvantage that cascades into higher expense for every bit of data its network delivers. This launch problem has been exacerbated by geopolitical shifts. Eutelsat's initial deployment relied heavily on Russian Soyuz 2 rockets, but the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 severed this partnership. This forced an urgent and ironic shift to relying on its chief competitor SpaceX, as well as India's ISRO GSLV Mark III, to continue building its constellation. This structural cost disadvantage casts a shadow over Eutelsat's prospects, especially with the imminent arrival of Amazon's LEO, which also targets the enterprise market. Eutelsat's path to improving its competitiveness appears constrained until Europe can develop and operationalize its own cheap, reusable launch rockets to drastically reduce the cost of accessing space. Another smaller satellite broadband competitor is Luxembourg-based SES with its O3b mPOWER constellation. The O3b mPOWER is a second-generation medium Earth orbit constellation developed by SES. The system is designed to deliver high-throughput connectivity for industries including telecommunications, marine operations, government, and energy. Building on the success of SES's original O3b system, operational since 2014, mPOWER orbits at 8,000 kilometers altitude, covering 96% of the global population between latitudes 50 degrees north and 50 degrees south. SCSSA is a leading global satellite operator known for pioneering the multi-orbit strategy. The company, founded in 1985, has grown into one of the world's largest satellite communications providers, serving broadcasters, telecom operators, government, and enterprises worldwide. It operates dozens of GEO satellites, including its famous Astra satellite for TV broadcasting across Europe. Following its merger with Intelsat in July 2025, the combined company now operates a fleet of over 120 satellites. Each 1,700 kilogram satellite, constructed by Boeing, incorporates an all-electric propulsion system and software-defined antennas capable of dynamically shaping and steering 5,000 spot beams per satellite. These beams can be reconfigured in real time, allowing precise bandwidth allocation ranging from 50 megabits per second to 100 gigabits per second per terminal. With latency as low as 150 milliseconds, mPOWER outperforms traditional geostationary systems by force behind the 50 millisecond latencies of LEO constellations like Starlink. Since its inception, O3B mPOWER has achieved significant milestones. The first two satellites were launched in December 2022, followed by an additional pair in April and November 2023. As of April 2024, 6 satellites were operational, with 2 more launched in December 2024 and 5 additionally planned for 2026, making a total of about 13 satellites. However, the program has faced setbacks. Early satellites experienced electrical issues that reduced their lifespan and capacity, but subsequent units were redesigned and 2 extra satellites were added to compensate for the reduced performance of the initial batch. Launches rely on SpaceX Falcon 9 rockets, with their ground stations integrated with Microsoft Azure data centers through a partnership with Microsoft, enabling cloud access for real-time analytics and edge computing. For market access, they have partnerships with telecom giants like Vodafone of the UK, Orange of France, and Geo Platforms of India to use their satellites for 5G backhaul to serve mobile in remote areas like in the Cook Islands and in Senegal. In the maritime sector, clients like Virgin Voyages and MSC Cruises utilize mPOWER for high-speed onboard internet for passenger connectivity. By focusing on enterprise, government, and mobility sectors, the company offers a resilient, adaptable solution in an increasingly interconnected world. By 2026, the completed constellation aims to deliver over 10 terabytes of capacity, targeting underserved markets in Asia, Africa, and the Arctic. The United Kingdom is also getting into the game. UK-based Open Cosmos has secured a strategic position in emerging satellite broadband markets by obtaining a license for Ka-band spectrum and announcing plans to begin launching a dedicated constellation starting in 2027. Open Cosmos is not aiming to directly compete with global consumer broadband giants like Starlink. Instead, its strategy appears focused on serving specific enterprise, institutional, and government needs. The main challenges will be executing the technical development on schedule, securing sufficient funding for the full constellation, and successfully differentiating its specialized service in a market where large-scale broadband is becoming a commodity. Building a functional broadband mega-constellation in LEO is a vastly more complex and capital-intensive undertaking than operating traditional GEO satellites. The core difficulty shifts from building a few exquisite large satellites to mass-producing hundreds of thousands of smaller, sophisticated satellites on an assembly line at low cost. This requires radical transformation of the satellite manufacturing supply chain. The most successful operator, SpaceX Starlink, leverages its own reusable Falcon 9 rockets to deploy satellites frequently and cost-effectively, demonstrating that controlling the launch, satellite manufacturing, and user terminal supply chains is a critical component of this business model. The total investment for a global system runs into the tens of billions, a scale of risk traditionally difficult for European companies. Europe's primary weakness is the lack of frequent, low-cost, and independent launch capability for LEO constellations. Historically, Europe's space strategy was built around serving a different market than the one that now dominates. Its competitive advantage lay in high-precision, highly reliable launches to geostationary orbit, a strength enabled by its equatorial launch site in French Guiana. For decades, this allowed European rockets like Ariane 5 to capture a share of the commercial geo-satellite launch market. The new Ariane 6 rocket, while powerful, is an expendable vehicle whose development has faced delays and high costs. It's not designed for the weekly or monthly launch cadence needed to deploy and maintain mega constellations. Europe has no operational equivalent of SpaceX's reusable Falcon 9, which has slashed launch costs and enabled rapid deployment. Building a reusable rocket requires a technical overhaul, heavy investment in R&D, and the creation of new industrial supply chains. Moving Europe's established aerospace industry, optimized for building a few exquisite expendable rockets per year towards mass-producing reusable stages, is a monumental task that cannot be rushed. They are now funding a group of startup companies to build reusable rockets for the continent, but these companies are new to rocket design and it will take time for them to perfect rocket engine making and the assembly of reusable rockets. The startup companies making rockets include Rocket Factory Augsburg from Germany, Maya Space from France, and PLD Space from Spain. These startups are looking to start with light-class reusable rockets and will most likely not graduate to medium-lift reusables until after the mid-2030s. So Europe will most likely be dependent on other players for a while. While Europe boasts world-class aerospace companies like Airbus and Thales Alenia, its industrial base is optimized to build small numbers of large, custom and highly reliable geo satellites, not for mass production of small satellites. The supply chain for key components like affordable phased array antennas and space-qualified electronics is less developed than in the US or China. Europe will have to streamline its highly fragmented satellite industry into an integrated, scalable approach to compete with American competitors. In response to the growing dominance of US and Chinese mega constellations, Europe's leading aerospace firms, Airbus, Thales, and Leonardo, are exploring the creation of a joint space company. This proposed venture, known under the working title Project Bromo, aims to consolidate the continent's fragmented satellite manufacturing sector into a single powerful entity valued at approximately $11.6 billion. The strategic goal is to create a European champion capable of competing on scale, cost, and speed with global giants emerging from China and America, while also serving as a sovereign industrial platform for European defense and communications. If realized, Project Bromo could reshape Europe's space industry structure by unifying production, streamlining governance, and accelerating manufacturing to capture a larger share of the global market. However, Europe's strategic position is hampered by a critical weakness: the lack of domestic reusable launch capacity. The European Union is also making efforts to secure Europe's satellite infrastructure. After clashes with Elon Musk over Starlink's use in Ukraine and broader friction with the United States, the EU is taking direct action to guarantee its communication sovereignty. Its answer is the IRIS-2, Infrastructure for Resilience, Interconnectivity and Security by Satellite. This is billed as a sovereign, secure system for European government and critical infrastructure designed to provide encrypted connectivity for defense, crisis response, and institutional use. The aim is to challenge America's LEO companies by ensuring Europe is not totally dependent on American-owned constellations for its core government and security needs, while also fostering a European commercial space ecosystem. Announced in 2022, this $11 billion project comprises approximately 290 satellites across 3 orbital planes. The primary cluster contains 264 low Earth orbit satellites at altitude of about 1,200 kilometers, delivering low latency of about 70 milliseconds for broadband internet. But that won't be as fast as the 30 milliseconds latency of the Starlink Constellation. A medium Earth orbit layer with 18 satellites at 8,000 kilometers will ensure secure intergovernment communications, and a 10 satellite cluster in very low orbit between 400 to 750 kilometers will be for testing advanced technologies like quantum encryption. This constellation's approximately 290 satellites compared to a competitor like Starlink's 10,000 operates on a significantly smaller scale, which necessitates careful bandwidth management. To meet critical needs, the project plans to allocate roughly 25% of its total network capacity exclusively for government use, including military operations and disaster response. IRIS will utilize Ka bands between 26 to 40 GHz, which include secure military Ka Gov frequencies from OneWeb. For commercial and general user connectivity, it will provide broadband services in the Ku band of between 12 to 18 GHz. The primary operator will be the SpaceRISE consortium led by private European satellite operators Eutelsat, SES, and Hypersat. Telecom giants Deutsche Telekom and Orange will contribute expertise in terrestrial network integration. The consortium will pool their expertise and resources to jointly define the system's architecture, while the heavy lifting of satellite construction and systems integration is handled by specialized manufacturers like Thales Alenia Space, Airbus Defence, OHB, and Telespazio. Commercial applications will include rural broadband, maritime connectivity, and aviation services, with a goal to serve about 40 million users by 2030. The system will also support consumer services like IoT applications, smart energy grids, and cloud services. Geopolitically, the constellation will extend coverage to Africa and the Arctic, aligning with European priorities to counter foreign influence and secure trade routes. For the deployment timeline, the first launch is expected in 2029, with full operational capability not expected before 2031. There is planned to be 24 missions, deploying 10 to 16 satellites per launch between 2029 and 2030. Full deployment of the 290 satellites is expected by 2031, though technical complexities and funding negotiations may further delay this timeline. IRIS Square is to be funded through a public-private partnership with €6 billion coming from the EU, $550 million from the European Space Agency, and $4.1 billion from private investors. The EU is ready to fund the project, but most private companies do not find the project lucrative enough to be invested in. Private sector partners are essential for funding and expertise, but will naturally seek market rate profitability. In contrast, the EU's primary imperative is security and strategic autonomy, not profit. This inherent conflict between public security goals and private commercial interests make this business model inherently challenging and has significantly complicated efforts to attract the substantial private investment the project requires. Apart from competing with Starlink and Amazon's LEO, it will also compete with other European companies like Eutelsat OneWeb and O3b mPOWER for the comparatively small European market. But even before IRIS becomes operational, individual European nations are splintering the effort by pursuing their own sovereign systems. Italy, while still developing its Sacral military communication satellite, has courted Starlink for defense connectivity, though negotiations stalled in early 2025 amid political backlash. Germany has launched its SATCOM BW program. France continues to advance its Syracuse series, and the United Kingdom is pressing ahead with its Skynet system. Each nation, wary of ceding control of its critical orbital infrastructure, is now hedging against the very collective European project that was supposed to unify them. American officials and companies have also voiced strong objections to the IRIS Square initiative and the accompanying EU Space Act. Their primary criticism is that the legislation, while framed as ensuring space safety and security, functions as a protectionist industrial policy. They view the rules as non-tariff barriers designed to systematically favor European satellite manufacturers and service providers, such as by mandating the use of EU-based launchers and technologies. This stance has led to warnings from Washington that these policies risk provoking retaliatory measures, potentially escalating into a trade dispute that could fragment the space industry. The widespread deployment of low Earth orbit constellations is poised to have profound impact on European society and its economy. On one hand, these networks promise to be a powerful force for connectivity and innovation, acting as a universal data layer. In rural and remote villages in the Alpines, Arctic, and Mediterranean islands, broadband constellations will deliver high internet speed for telemedicine, online education, and digital governance services, empowering communities with access to e-commerce, digital banking, and real-time agriculture data like soil health and weather forecasts. During disasters like earthquakes or wildfires, these constellations will restore critical communications for first responders and affected communities. For the transport sector, this connectivity will be essential for improved transportation. Rail networks will leverage satellite connectivity for high-speed Wi-Fi on trains, real-time monitoring of the tracks, and signaling systems. For aircrafts, in-flight connectivity will transform air travel by providing Wi-Fi on commercial airlines, private jets, and military aircrafts, while enabling real-time data transmission for flight diagnostics and weather updates. Maritime industries will rely on satellite internet for cruise liners, navigation, crew welfare, and operational efficiency of cargo ships and fishing vessels. Scientific teams in the Arctic, Antarctic, or rainforest will use the improved satellite connectivity to transmit ecological data and coordinate expeditions. Adventure tourists and explorers will stay connected in national parks or mountainous regions, while wildlife conservationists will be able to better track endangered species using GPS collars and camera straps that relay real-time video. For the economy, this connectivity will be an essential backbone for remote industries. Enterprises will connect remote mining sites, oil fields, and construction projects to headquarters for logistics and safety, while IoT applications will enable predictive maintenance of machinery in isolated locations. Offshore oil rigs and wind farms will use real-time data to monitor equipment and ensure safety. The satellite communications industry is quickly merging with the mobile telecom sector, enabling hybrid 5G LEO networks that are accelerating IoT adoption, edge computing, and AI-driven analytics. By bridging connectivity gaps across land, air, sea, and beyond, satellite constellations are not just a technological leap, but will be a final solution to global communications. The United States has established a commanding lead, particularly in satellites and rocket launches. In 2024, US firms were responsible for building a remarkable 83% of all commercial satellites launched globally and captured 69% of global satellite manufacturing revenue. The launch sector shows similar dominance, with US providers, primarily SpaceX, accounting for 65% of all global launch revenue. If dominated by foreign commercial giants like SpaceX Starlink, Europe could face a loss of technological sovereignty, with its critical infrastructure and data flows dependent on non-EU systems. There is also a risk that purely commercial models will crowd out European new space companies, potentially deepening the dependence on foreign space services. Satellite constellations have become critical infrastructure for both civilian and military operations, raising significant security concerns. They are also becoming tools of geopolitical influence, with the US and China vying for dominance. Nations fear vulnerabilities such as cyber attacks, signal jamming, or kinetic strikes on satellites, which could cripple communications, navigation, and surveillance systems. This drive for technological sovereignty is propelling nations to develop domestic constellations. The EU's IRIS², Russia's Bureau 1414 Dawn, and China's Guowang reflect ambitions to control data flows and reduce dependency on US-dominated systems like Starlink. Market access is increasingly politicized. Countries may block foreign constellations with regulatory barriers over security fears, such as concerns that global satellites could enable surveillance or foreign data control. Militarization is also further complicating efforts. Countries are investing heavily in constellations to ensure secure, resilient networks. Sustainable solutions like active debris removal and shared spectrum protocols require unprecedented international cooperation, but geopolitical rivalries and sovereignty claims will hinder progress. But there is a bit of hope. It is in the interest of all players to have their satellites safe so they may find a way to tolerate each other, creating a new equilibrium.